Welcome back. I was 20 when I met my husband. We met when we were both traveling around Europe. I was just finishing my trip, he was just starting his. We met and slept together the same day and spent my last few days together. For anyone saying this was a red flag for him any more than it was for me, your sexism is showing. After he went home, we struck up communication again and had a long-distance relationship that lasted a year. During this time, we talked about previous relationships and why they failed. I told him my ex dumped me for kissing another girl, and at the time, I didn't think it was a big deal. But I had since realized that cheating is cheating and it was wrong of me to do it. He moved to me as his work is freelance and he can do it from anywhere. And I had spent the last year settling into a job I really liked. This was his suggestion. He makes more money than me and wanted to buy a house right away. I told him I would rather wait until we were married. We had discussed marriage at length and it's what we both wanted. And we could buy one together. But he said he didn't want to throw money away on rent. And when we got married and I signed a prenup, he would put my name on the mortgage. The suggestion of a prenup was offensive as he knew my family are well off, and I had never cared about money, but I agreed. I also wanted to keep my own last name if we got married. And he said he wouldn't marry me if I didn't take his last name. This I also agreed to. He said fair is fair, and if I wanted to live and raise kids near my family and not his, and I be the one to stay home while he worked when we had kids, which I wanted, then I had to make compromises too. I didn't think these were fair compromises, but I agreed. He bought the house against my wishes, and then we got married. And to his credit, he put my name on the mortgage the following week. But this all left a bitter taste in my mouth. For the most part, things were great. I had a good social life and was outgoing. He was more of a stay-at-home type. I had lots of friends, he was focused on work. We were different, but we made it work. One of the men I worked with expressed an interest, even knowing I was married, and I told him no. I told my husband this and he asked me to stop spending time with him outside work. I told him no, as I had already shot the other man down. This was a mistake on my part, and I admit it. When things were good, they were great. But I also had resentments about the decisions I had been forced to make, and felt less like an equal partner in the marriage by the day. He bought a dog without my consent. When we were long distance, I told him I wanted a dog, but that I wanted to wait until we had kids so they could bond together. He claims I never mentioned this last part. He says I didn't, I say I did. He claimed it was a surprise for me and that I was ungrateful for kicking up a fuss, so the dog stayed. I've never been great at communicating and prefer my own space when things go bad. So instead of talking about these issues, I let them fester and spent more time with my friends, including the guy from work. My husband was overprotective and asked me to check in with him if I was out late, and asked me not to stay out at night, even when I was staying at a female friend's house. I'm not the apron and dishwashing type of woman. I've always valued my freedom. These arguments drove a wedge between us, and I made a terrible decision. I was drunk and slept with the guy from the office. I came home after and slept on the couch and cried all night. My husband came down the next morning and attacked me for not coming home at a reasonable time. Said I was a mess because I slept in the clothes I went out in and that I looked like a hooker. The other man, Greg, never said things like this to me. He enjoyed being social and dancing and all the other things my husband didn't. I was young and stupid and decided to keep seeing him. He was kind and decent, and the more time I spent with him, the more I wished I'd met him first. I found out I was pregnant. I didn't know who the baby was, and I was racked with guilt. I told Greg the day I found out, and he told me to get an abortion. That he didn't want to get caught up in the middle of raising a kid with a married woman. This was the moment when the affair ended. I told my husband a week later. He didn't have to pry the truth out of me. A couple of months in, he saw me upset and I told him. He flew home without telling me and ignored my calls. I realized then that I had made a terrible mistake and decided to recommit to my marriage. I told him I would get an abortion if the child wasn't his. He told me to go frick myself and hung up. Eventually, he came home and we found out the baby wasn't his. So, as we agreed, I put on the appointment for the abortion. When we did the paternity test, the doctor asked me if I wanted to know the sex. My husband answered for me and said it doesn't matter, and we left. I went back without him and found out it wasn't an it was a she, my daughter. Over the course of the week, I had thoughts of being a mother. I had always wanted to raise kids, and in my fantasies during this week, I didn't think about the other man. This was my husband's baby. I pictured the three of us together as a family. It wasn't ideal, but there was no good reason I could think of that we wouldn't make the best of a bad situation. I planned to tell him who the father was. I panicked and told him it was a one-time thing while I was away for the weekend. And I would quit my job. It wasn't perfect, but if he loved me, we could make it work. Life throws tests at us, and when I took my marriage vows, I realized this and hoped he would too. The day of the appointment, I begged him not to make me choose. I begged him to do one thing for me, not to commit to a lifetime of it, not even to love the baby, just to do one thing for me. I begged him to try. I asked him to give it a chance. He told me he was filing for divorce. I need to make something clear. Yes, I made mistakes, but I love my husband. He was the great love of my life and still is. He told me he wouldn't even try to make it work, and if I didn't have the operation, he would leave me and file for divorce that day. I asked him to let me think about it, and he said no to that too. I was torn between two horrible choices, and I chose one. I had the abortion. I was never going to raise a baby alone. If he wasn't with me on this, I wasn't going through with it. And he made it clear he wasn't with me. The few weeks after the operation, I was in more pain than I had ever been in my life. During this time, I stayed with my parents because we couldn't be around each other. I blamed him for making me choose. He still hated me for the cheating, and even told me he hated me for wanting to keep the baby and for asking him to be around for us. But I didn't want it to be in vain, so I moved back home and tried to make it work. I kept my feelings bottled up because I didn't want to remind him of what I'd done. I was on medical leave for 3 months and none of my friends knew. As far as they knew, Sam, my husband, and I had miscarried, as did my parents. I had nobody to talk to. I asked Greg to come over and we talked. I cried and he cried with me. It felt good to be heard and not have to wear a mask. These visits happened another half a dozen times, and it's important to know nothing sexual happened. The affair was over. I was leaning on a friend, the only friend who knew what I was going through. You know the rest. He came home, found out Greg was the father. We moved away, and things got better. These were great years, and I loved him with my whole heart. I never forgot what happened, but we talked about having our own children. I was happy, and I had him to thank for that. When I found out I couldn't have children anymore, I tried to tell him, but I had remembered the way he looked at me years ago when he found out. The names he called me. I thought of how much he loved me, and I didn't want to ruin that by telling him I could never give him children because of my betrayal. I reached out to Greg. I found out he had moved away from our hometown too and was only a few hours' drive away. He's married now, but I wasn't looking to start anything back up, only to talk. He told me I should tell Sam. I couldn't. We agreed to meet, and I took the day off work. We met halfway, and we slept together. We agreed it would be a one-time thing and both went back to our partners. To anyone who wants to call me a hoe, I know it was wrong, but life isn't black and white. I don't regret anything. I love them both, and for better or worse, they'll both always be a part of what makes me who I am today. I got drunk and told Sam everything. I was hurt and cruel to him and told him I wasn't sorry I met up with Greg. He called me a hoe again and told me he was glad I gave up the baby. I slapped him, he slapped me back. I don't resent him at all for hitting me. He had never lifted a hand to me before and I said awful things that night. But after he told me that he was glad that the choice he forced me into deprived me of ever being able to be a mother, that I can't forgive. I'll never forgive myself for the abortion, and I'll never forgive him. The difference is, he gets to move on and have a family, and I never will. I'm back home with my parents now, and I've spoken to divorce lawyers too. They say a prenup doesn't mean anything anymore, but I'm not going to take anything away from him. I just want it to be over too, so maybe we can both find some peace. Update. I talked to a therapist today. I don't want to detail everything, but 1 hour with a paid professional held a pretty inescapable mirror up to my face. Sam did absolutely nothing wrong. I would say I forgave him for the abortion, but there's nothing to forgive. That was the biggest realization I've had. I put him in an awful position and asked him to do something that probably would have driven him to suicide. I chose to have the abortion and mutilate my own body beyond repair. I alone chose that. I betrayed him in ways I, as a woman, am incapable of ever understanding. And I have to live with that, and my mutilated body forever. And I should live with that forever as a reminder. Rather than leaving your husband and openly acknowledging your feelings for someone else, you chose to cheat. This betrayal continued, leading to a pregnancy where you asked your husband to spare you from making a choice between him and having an abortion. Years later, you reunited with this man and engaged in a sexual relationship, despite him being married as well. I apologize, but the magnitude of mistakes in this narrative leaves no room for ambiguity. One would never subject the love of their life to such immense pain. I'm sorry for the harsh judgment, but cheating is where I personally draw the line.